Good evening, everybody. This is Bob Tygenhof. I'm the director of the Center for Active Lifestyle Medicine at the Integrative Medical Group in Southern California. We do a lot of work with people in terms of lifestyle medicine, and this series is a result of that work. We do detoxification, help people clean up their diets primarily, but beyond that, it's also a matter of cleaning up the environment that they live in. Not that they can clean up everybody's environment, but you can certainly do a lot of things to clean up the one that you happen to inhabit. Today we're going to talk about HEPA filters, and tomorrow we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, BPA, bisphenol A, which is probably the chief endocrine disruptor of all the chemicals out there, and the one that seems to be most in the news and responsible for an awful lot of the problems that people face today with endocrine disruption. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about not getting stuck with nonstick cookware. What, after all, is so bad about nonstick cookware, why you may want to avoid it, and what you can do in order to minimize the hazard that perhaps it presents in your house. But today, we're going to talk about HEPA filters. Now, of course, the first question that comes up is, what is a HEPA filter? And HEPA itself, HEPA, stands for High Efficiency Particulate Air Filter. They were originally developed in World War II with the express desire and intent of keeping some of the laboratories that were working with radioactive particles habitable for the researchers who were working in them. So they needed filters that would capture and sequester these radioactive particles, very, very small particulate matter that became airborne. And so consequently, the HEPA filter was born. Following World War II, they found a lot of application in industrial settings. They found application in clean rooms, in hospitals, and a number of areas where very, very small particles are in fact a major concern. How small are we talking about? The standard, and there is an official US standard for HEPA filters, is that HEPA filters must remove 99.97% of all particulate matter that is 0.3 microns and larger. How big is a micron? A micron happens to be 1/1,000,000th of a meter, which, as you can imagine, is really quite small. It really doesn't help, though, in terms of getting a good visual picture of just how big that happens to be. A human hair, on the other hand, is somewhere between 70 and 100 microns wide. So the particles that we're talking about, you could stretch about 30 to 40 of these very small particles. Well, in fact, with the 0.3 standard, which is different from the particulate matter 2.5, which is one of the standards that's also used in terms of smog and things like that. If you're talking about 0.3, then you're really talking about about 200 particles across a single human hair. So we're talking about very, very small particles. Where do they come from? Well, on the outside of your house, in the air about your neighborhood, most of them are the result of combustion. And there we're talking about automobiles, buses, trucks, off-road vehicles, snowmobiles, lawnmowers, things like that. A lot of them, there's a lot of smoke that comes out of all of these different things. But transportation isn't the only source of these. When we heat our homes, if we're using coal or home heating oil or even wood, if you've ever been in a ski resort in the winter, you can see the smog layer hanging over the valley down where all of the condominiums are, and that's the same sort of stuff. Why is this bad? Well, very, very fine particulate matter, which qualifies with that 2.5 micron and below category, that is very, very easily inhaled and absorbed into the body. It gets deep into the lungs, and it'll either cause irritation in the lungs itself, or in fact, it will enter into circulation and circulate through the body. The typical consequences and symptoms that we see with this are the things that you've seen probably somewhere close to where you live, or to a major city that you may have visited. It's the coughing, the wheezing, the irritated, burning throat, the nasal passages, the runny nose, those sorts of things, very, very common results of fine particulate matter. What we're now starting to realize, though, is that it goes way beyond that. And indeed, there are studies that have tracked the incidence of death, mortality from heart disease and from asthmatic and lung conditions. They correspond pretty well with high smog days. We're also now starting to see that research is emerging showing that fine particulate matter, again, that 2.5 micron and below, is highly, highly associated with obesity. That it seems that this creates an inflamed environment within the body, and inflammation is one of the body's responses to inflammation is to prepare for the worst, and it does that by conserving energy and putting on the pounds. So, in fact, when you look at demographic data surrounding highways, you see that obesity rises very dramatically as you get closer and closer to the freeways. Now, it's not conclusive because there are probably socioeconomic reasons for that as well. You don't find too many expensive home tracts built right on the freeways, but you do find a lot of apartment buildings that typically go at lower rents, things like that. So it's a cloudy picture, but nevertheless, there seems to be, even when you take into consideration the socioeconomic factors, there seems to be a pretty good correlation between exposure to fine particulate matter and obesity. And when they run the same kinds of experiments with mice in mouse models, they see the same sort of thing emerging. So if in fact we have all this stuff, and by the way, we talked about where you get exposed to it on the outside of your house. Inside of your house, typically, if you have a very clean house, you're going to have much lower levels. But if you happen to burn candles or incense, or you have a fireplace that you enjoy watching in the evening, particularly if it's a wood burning fireplace, you're going to start to generate and accumulate a lot of this fine particulate matter yourself. You can also get it from cooking food, frying, broiling. They create a lot of smoke. The smoke is basically fine particulate matter. So you can actually, through a variety of different measures, end up with higher rates of smog and pollution inside your house than in the outside world. What do you do about it? Oh, well, let's step back a second, and beyond the irritation and the rise in obesity, we also see increased levels of death from heart disease and asthma and bronchitis and respiratory diseases. So it's not an inconsequential issue. For people looking for solutions, you have a variety of options. Number one is vacuum cleaners. You can buy vacuum cleaners with HEPA filters. You can also get them with what are called S filters. An S filter is a European equivalent of the HEPA filter. So they're just as good. If you happen to go shopping for one and you run into it, that's in fact the same standard as, virtually the same standard as the HEPA filter. They're available in vacuum cleaners. People like Miele, Maytag, SIBO, Protein, Vapamore, those are some of the manufacturers who make HEPA filter vacuum cleaners. Why don't you want to use a regular vacuum cleaner? Regular vacuum cleaners have a much higher standard in terms of the particulate matter that they trap. Once particles get below about 20 microns, which is approximately 10 times greater than the capacity of HEPA filters, well, beyond the 2.5 particulate matter, but if you're looking at it in terms of 0.3 size, there again, you're looking at 70 to 80 times smaller particles. The regular vacuum cleaners have porous bags. These very, very small particles go right through the bag, out the back end and the exhaust, and you end up, if there is a fine particulate matter issue in the house, you've done absolutely nothing to clean it up with a regular vacuum cleaner. The HEPA filter, on the other hand, will capture that and actually take it out and remove it from the air. So you're in a much better position if you have that. Beyond the vacuum cleaners, you can also get air purifiers, and the air purifiers have been used industrially for a long time in machine shops that do welding, laser cutting, any kind of activity that generates a lot of particulate matter. Also generators that are used in industrial settings as well. There's a lot of gas and fuel burning types of machinery that are used. The HEPA air purifiers will filter that out and create a much safer environment. So those are really the options that you have, purifiers and vacuum cleaners. Are they good for asthma and allergies? Well, the recommendations from the medical societies are to first do everything you can to clean your house, get rid of the carpets, get rid of all the areas that collect and capture this type of particulate matter. And once you've done that, and if you find that you still are suffering from the consequences of exposure to allergens and allergies, it's not entirely clear if HEPA filters will give you a great benefit. Anecdotally, it seems that some people get benefit. And so the recommendation is it's worth a try, but there's no guarantee with it. So you can try that if you have allergies and asthma. Where do you get these? Well, if you've got a vacuum cleaner store or any sort of appliance store, larger appliance stores, generally speaking, in the area, then they may carry the air filters, the air purifiers. You can also, by the way, get them for your home. So most homes have central heating and air conditioning. The filters that typically either mount in the walls or on the units themselves, you can get HEPA filters for those as well. They're more expensive and they have to be changed more often, but it is an option, again, depending on what your particular needs are. There are people who live in areas of this country where there isn't a lot of particulate matter. It's not much of a concern and they really don't need these. So you really have to gauge and evaluate where it is that you live, what the needs of your family are. If you have children, grandchildren, older adults who are struggling with respiratory issues, then maybe this is something that you need to do, given the fact that we have created a world in which we utilize combustion for home heating, for transportation, for all these different areas. We've actually created a world that has much, much higher degrees and rates of particulate matter than have ever historically existed. And consequently, we're not really all that well adapted to deal with this. And you may, in fact, find that that the solution that works best for you is to get one of these HEPA filter choices and selections. Again, if you, it can be a lifesaver for the right people. It's one of the techniques, one of the strategies you can use to be safe in an unsafe world. I encourage you to investigate it and see if that's a solution that works for you. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about bisphenol A. That will be at 5 p.m. Pacific time. I hope to see you then. And until then, try to stay safe in what has become a pretty unsafe world. Good night.